Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, no matter what time of the day it is for you. We want to really give you our thanks for listening to us today on this week's episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. And this week, as every week, what we try to do is pick out a topic that we know is giving people problems in running their business. And this week is no different. We picked out one really good item that we're going to talk about today, and we're hopefully going to share with you some processes that'll help you get on top of this issue. So, Cheryl, what would you say about today's topic we're getting ready to discuss? Turn your mic on.
Accountability. Open your mic. Yeah, our topic today is on accountability. The thing, I think every company needs that. Some have it, nobody's perfect at it. So, we're going to try to feather in on how to help you to set up the accountability in your company and what you need to do to make that happen.
There you go. Brandi, what's your thoughts before we begin today's episode in our broadcast?
Well, I think we see this over and over again as a failure in a lot of businesses that we deal with. Often, when a office is in chaos, a business is in chaos, it's because there's no accountability from the upper level management. And that leads to a lot of problems. And honestly, I don't even think that the upper level management knows that they're not holding people accountable. And then the ones that do, I think they're fearful to hold people accountable. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about from my end.
There you go. So, we're going to talk a little bit about fears. We're going to talk about accountability. We're going to talk about inspecting for what you expect. And these are all part of the roles that you have as a manager of your business. So, stick around. We'll be right back and we'll get started with this week's episode. So, welcome back with us. And like I said, this week our subject matter is accountability, and not only accountability of the people that work for you, but we're also going to talk about self accountability because this is one of the things that all of us have to learn. And that's one of the things that people have problems with sometimes is holding themselves accountable. So, Cheryl, I'm going to start out with you today. What's your leading thoughts on this subject matter today?
Well, my leading thought is number one, I think you have to first, before you start the accountability part, you have to make sure you have the right people hired, the people that will listen when you try to set up your accountability, your chart, whatever you're working on. But like you say, you've got that coming out, but you've got to be accountable to yourself to hold them accountable and hire those people.
There you go. So, Brandi, what about you? What's your opening thoughts on this today?
People want to be held accountable. And I'm going to read a definition of accountability: holding people to a clearly, that's key, clearly defined expectation. And so, what I mean by that is oftentimes, well, Jerry, I could tell you right now, Jerry, I want you to go to the store and get some groceries. That doesn't mean anything. That's too vague. I need to tell you, Jerry, I need you to go to the store right now, buy a gallon of milk, and come straight back. That's clearly defined expectation. And I find often we're too vague without realizing it. Um, yeah, that's what I would start out with.
Okay, so one of your things is you're thinking that people don't get enough instructions of how to actually carry out the task and get the task done completely, which is dead on what our buddy Al Levy teaches in his systems approach. So one of the first thing is what you just said is you've got to set clear expectations, and not only that, you've got to document them. So Brandi, with what you just said, not only do we have to tell them, would you agree that it also helps to write a note or have them write down what you're saying and then possibly even repeating it back to you? Would that be part of the process, you think?
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the repeating it back, because that's something that I often myself forget about, and I think is so powerful. But what happens oftentimes is we'll be working with a client and they're complaining about whatever it may be. So and so didn't do this or that. And I'll ask, well, when did you tell them it needed to be done by? Well, I didn't. Well, that's not a clearly defined expectation. You're leaving it up to them on when that's going to get done. You have to set it more clearly. What I like to use in our office, and I think I've shared this before, we use Microsoft Checklist. And so we have different groups set up on there. We have one for topics for our office meeting, one for our manager's meeting. I have one with my personal assistant. I have one with my office manager. So I can actually go in there and write down, this is what I need you to do. This is the task. And then Microsoft actually helps me hold them accountable. I can set a date that I need it done by, and then they can go in there and check it off when it's done, and I get a notification. So that's just one of the newer ways of holding people accountable.
Got you. So Cheryl, what's your thoughts on that?
I agree with Brandi. You've got to do it, but you've got to do it across the table. You can't, as she said, she's got it in all different locations and with all her different people. So you can't hold the office accountable and not hold your techs accountable, not holding yourself accountable. And the thing is, you've got to be willing to go in there and look at those calendars, make sure that it's happened. And if it's not at that particular time, find out why. Don't wait a week and come up and start blaming somebody for doing something. You want to know why it wasn't done, because it might have been just instead of an excuse, it could have actually been a reason. But after it's a week old, it's an excuse.
Okay. So we got to inspect for what we expect. We've got to inspect for that. And the other thing is, and you're going to hate this, we got to nip it in the bud if there's a problem, right? And I know how you love that, nip it in the bud for it, right?
No comment.
So anyway, that was my first thought. And then here's my second note down. If you're going to do things and get things accomplished, is it a matter of setting the goals? Do you think people do not set the goals with their people for what they need to accomplish? Brandi, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think we're not clear enough on what our goals are in the business? We know them in our heads, but are we actually sharing them? That's one of the things that it's like I've got a SWAT meeting to do Monday. And what I've told the client is, hey, I need you to share what your vision is for this company. I know you've done it before, but I want to repeat it. So is that part of the problem, that we're not communicating it out, what our goals, what our vision is?
Transparency is the word I like to use. We have to be transparent. And I get it. We all are working, 80 hours a week if we own the company, and we're tired and we're exhausted. And so the last thing we want to do is sit everybody down and talk about the mission of the company. But we have to, or it leads to decreased morale, decreased engagement, decreased trust, and increased turnover.
Got you covered. Cheryl, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think people say what their vision is? Do they share it with their workforces? Is that part of the problem of not getting accountability going, because we're not really sharing with our people what we're trying to accomplish? We're just kind of speaking in half sentences. And do we expect them to be mind readers?
I'm afraid I see that in more companies than I want to. And I think each of us have been guilty of doing exactly the same things at times. I don't think anybody out there can raise their hand and say they've never done it. But yeah, a lot of people, especially a lot of owners, will hold everything so tight to their chest. They're afraid that if people learn that much about the company, they're going to leave, or they're not going to like it, or they feel vulnerable. And I think that's the biggest word for a business owner, if he becomes transparent. I like Brandi, I like transparency. I'd rather you know it right up front. If you don't like it right up front, we don't have to deal with it later. It's done with. And that's where it takes, like I was in the beginning, bringing in the right people that are willing to look at you and your company and what you have to offer, and buy in, follow the rules. And the thing is, we shouldn't have to hold people accountable. They should be self-accountable. They're just not.
Okay, got you covered. Then another thing is, do you think most people, Cheryl, I'm going to start with you on this one, but do you think that most managers are skilled in giving their people feedback and giving the feedback in a way that their people find it useful doesn't beat them down. Rather, the feedback actually may encourage them because we're telling people what they're doing good, but also what they're not meeting our objectives with. So, do you think people understand how to give feedback?
I don't think they do. They lead out with the bad. It's bad. They never look at the good. That's always, they throw a little bit of good in there, and I don't think you have to counterbalance one with the other, but I think if we look at the good and then explain the underlying bad of what's going on, we can twist it and move it on to the next realm, because a lot of owners just go in and they tell you everything you've done wrong. And it's not that people need the well, they do, but the accolades, they need to know what's going right, because if something's going wrong and they change it to go differently, they may change something that's right into something worse than the original problem was.
Gotcha. Brandy, what's your thoughts on that? Would you agree with what Cheryl's saying? Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I actually looked up some statistics. I can't speak today either. So Vital Smart studied nearly 800 professionals and found that 52%, so over half, hesitate to discuss peer performance problems like improper shortcuts, poor attention to detail, and incomplete work. And I think that speaks for itself. And 47% say they wait to share concerns or ideas that might improve an element of business because it encroaches on somebody else's turf. And I think what we see a lot is the person is either scared to talk to that person, they're scared that if they talk to them of the consequences that they might leave the company, and they've got jobs on the book. Or they just don't really understand accountability in the first place, and they think that everybody should be like them and just, as business owners, we just know what has to get done and we do it, and that's why we're business owners. But they think that everybody should think like them and should read their mind, and not everybody works that way. We've talked before about, in my office, I have one girl who's on the disc and she fits it perfectly. If I give her a task, I need to give her step-by-step instructions, and she's still going to come to me with one or two questions. She also catches everybody else's mistakes. She has much attention to detail. So I always have to think about, when I'm giving her an instruction, making sure that I make it as detailed as possible.
Yep. And that actually takes to my next question, Cheryl. I'm going to direct this one to you first because this is your area of specialty. When you do DISC assessments, you're checking behavior patterns, but what you also come up with is the communication styles. So in order to hold people accountable, how important is it for you to understand your own communication styles and the communication styles of the person that you're actually trying to hold or wanting to hold accountable? How important is that in the process? You heard where Brandi just talked about it there, but is that a key part of accountability, is actually understanding how to communicate with an individual?
It is, because we all have different ways that we need to be communicated with. I mean, we've talked about that considerable. Brandy's the girl in her office. Her way of being talked to is very, very detailed. And I know enough about Brandy's office. She has another girl that does not need that much detail and still gets her things done. A high D, really, they don't want the detail. They can pretty much think through it and go. So you have to learn to talk to that person, not at that person. And you have to change your way of speaking to match theirs to keep the wall from going up. I mean, I know we've all said something to someone before, their face glazes over and they don't hear the next word you say because you set them up to fail in the way you were communicating. So keep the door open, speak in the way they want to hear. And that's probably the thing I like in the DISC the most, is the communication page where you can read theirs. I know how to speak to Brandi. Brandy's keyed a lot like I am, so we can pretty much talk on the same thing. But I've got a girl in my office. I couldn't talk to her at the rate I do Brandi because I would lose her. And so once you've lost them, it's your fault. You can't hold them accountable if they don't understand what you're saying.
Right. So Brandy, same question, because At first, you didn't buy into the disc, and then when you had it done and realized where you could see the strengths and the weaknesses of your own office staff, how important is this? Do you think that you've got to communicate what your goals are, where they can hear it?
Well, I was thinking about when Cheryl was talking about it and the disc and the high D, I was thinking, gosh, my high D wants you to just give me the project and let me run with it, and then I'll show you how great it is. But I think it's important. But again, the disc is only as good as we put it to use.
Mhm.
So it's just words on a paper unless we actually put it into practice. And I had another point I had written down here that says what you don't hold accountable becomes the culture. So let's think about that for a minute. If you're letting the inmates run the prison, I always say that's the culture. So if you're letting somebody come in late to work and you're not addressing it, the other employees see it. They think, well, Sam's not getting in trouble for it, so I'm going to do it too. And now you have a culture of tardiness.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Brandy. If you had a client or it was a member of our group coaching, one of our group calls, and they were telling you that they had invested into a very expensive tool, a very expensive system, and they were paying for this, and their guys said, we're just not going to use that. We're just not going to. And that's just the way it is. What would be your reaction if that was your crew?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, because I wouldn't my first of all, I think my employees know better than to ever tell me that. I would absolutely say, tell me your fears around it, tell me why you don't want to use it. Let's, come up with some solutions together, but you're not going to say you just don't want to use it and you're not going to use it. That I mean, think about that for any other business. Like if I worked at Chick-fil-A and I'm just like, well, I don't want to make milkshakes. I'm not making milkshakes, but I'm the only one running the register and somebody orders a milkshake. Well, too bad. I'm not making milkshakes. They need to order something else. I mean, how would you have to think about that? How would that look?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Cheryl, what about your thoughts on that? Are you in tune with that and in agreement?
I am because it's the thing about it is like you say they letting the Indians run the company or however you put that. Sorry about that, but you if you're going to be the owner, if you're going to be the person, the manager, you don't have to be the owner. If you're going to be the overseer, the one that's over someone, they have to know that you have the authority to call them to the table if something goes wrong. And but like I say, you don't have to do it harshly, but you can sit down and talk with them and maybe they'll have a good idea. But eventually in the long run, with the money that we're talking about that was spent on particular things, you've you've paid for a program, you've got things going, it has to be done that way. And it only works if everyone does it. You can't let two or three do it their way and everybody else to do it because you lose your numbers and everything else.
Gotcha.
And Jared,
Well,
can I add a thought to that too?
yes,
And think about how else that looks. So if we're getting away with saying, well, we're just not going to use this program, then we think we can get away with a lot more. And that it doesn't just become we're not going to use the program. It becomes, well, we don't want to do this job today. We don't want to do this repair. Or we want something else.
yeah, very much so. Another note that I've got here is you've got to make accountability a habit. And along with that, accountability is not held because you're angry or you're upset. I think that if you had if you're trying to hold accountability and you're being, just to be honest with you, a horse's ass, you're being mean, you're beating people down. Randy, is that going to accomplish your goals?
No, and I don't think that I don't think it should have anything to do with punishment. It's really like this is my expectation of you, and then you meet the expectation. Our clients, they have an expectation that if we say we're going to be on their site doing their site visit this day, they have an expectation that we're going to be there. And if we're not, you better believe they're going to be on the phone asking what the heck happened and holding us accountable.
Correct. So you've got to make accountability a habit and you've got to do the accountability not from a position of anger. Cheryl, what's your thoughts on that?
That goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you come back at somebody in a position of anger, the wall's going to go up. You're not going to accomplish anything. These are not minor problems. but they are problems that can be solved between two adults. If you're talking to a child, a little different, but you've got adults that you're talking to, and they ought to be able to converse with you on a calm level to work out things. I mean, they hold us accountable. Believe me, come payday, it's accountable that we have their checks there. And so that's where I come in. If you're going to hold me accountable to have the jobs here for you, to have your paycheck available, to have it all, why should I not hold you accountable to do your work accurately and get it where we can keep business going? And again, it's more or less if it's a calm conversation. I don't like loud conversations myself, because when one rises, the next rises, and the next, and before you know it, you've got a fight going on. And at that point, somebody's going to get fired.
Okay. So, along with this, I've also got a note here that the leader has to set an example. And when I say the leader's got to set an example, the leader has got to be able to follow the accountability process and hold themselves accountable. I don't think a leader that is dropping the ball can really have the force or the standing to hold their people accountable if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Cheryl, your thoughts on that?
Hey, I'm totally with you. Like I say, if you're not providing what they need to make their job good, if they're not what they expect of you, if they, I have an open door policy. And so if I were just to go behind closed doors and close my doors to them, I have no right for them to talk to me when I want it done. So it's a trade-off. You have to be the type of a leader that you want your people to be. Again, back to Brandy's culture. The leader can't have one culture and the employees have a separate culture. It doesn't work that way. It's a team effort.
Okay. Brandy, your thoughts on that?
Well, I just wrote down Cheryl's paycheck example because I love that example. And that example you gave me, Jerry, of like if somebody has this expensive program and they don't want to use it, I would say if that happened in real life, I think that manager or owner should say, well, that's okay because I don't want to pay you this week, or I think I'm going to switch payroll to every 2 months. And just, let them think about that for a minute, what that looks like. So I think that was perfect. And then I like, yes, lead by example for sure. This is where I can't expect my CSRs to follow the SOP when putting in a repair job, but yet I don't follow it. And in fact, you'll see me usually here. They usually memorize the SOP. I'm usually the one going, okay, now I do this, now I do that. But you have to have that example. And then also don't accept excuses. I hate excuses. There's a saying about that, but I'm not going to say it on here because it has a bad word in it. But don't accept excuses either. Don't come to me with excuses of why you didn't get it done. If you're supposed to get something done and they have given you an acceptable time frame, then it needs to get done.
Gotcha. So first, this one's going to go to you first, Brandy. Do we have to reward our people for everything that they do? And when I'm saying reward, have we got to come up with a bonus plan? Have we got to come up with something? Or is it simple a matter that we've got to learn to say, thank you, great job? What do we do to reward our people whenever they do meet and they are holding themselves accountable? Okay, so what's your answer on that one?
Well, I like the way other people answer that when they say, why am I rewarding them for doing their job?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I do believe in rewards, especially if, like, let's say you've got a big project you're working on, and you set a goal for it, and then you guys exceed that goal. Then, of course, I think it's great to have a reward for that. Going back to something you guys said a little bit earlier made me think. I was doing an interview yesterday, and one of my questions is, who is your favorite boss and why? And her example was somebody she had worked with like 3 jobs ago. And the reason was they would say like, hey, we missed the mark on this and this today, but we hit it over the hill on this, and this. And so she said, they would give the good with the bad, which I know we've talked about how don't make a sandwich, but don't make a sandwich where it's good, bad, good. But they balanced it is what her point was. And that point came across to me. They balanced the good with the bad.
Okay. Cheryl, your thoughts.
Rewards are good. I see nothing wrong with rewards till you give so many that they become expected. A reward should be something that's unexpected. It needs to be something that is given for specific things and will not be expected if that same thing were to happen again. And I personally think that's where rewards get out of proportion. Then it becomes part of their salary. So why not just put it in the salary and take it out of the word reward?
Okay. So here's the next one. People stepping up to the plate to embrace and share failure. Where and what I mean by that, okay, we're getting off track. We're not going to be able to get this done. So what we've got to be able for our people to do is come to us and share what the problems are. What are the blockages that are getting there? And this is often what we go through discussing with the client. They'll be very frustrated. Something is not working. It's not supposed to. And it's like, what we've got to do is get them to understand what is the roadblock. Brandi, you and I, a lot of times, we talk about this in the terms of a post-mortem. In other words, and when we're tracking waste, we got to go back and figure out what was the fuse that started this downward spiral where things just escalate and go on. And then, but to do that and be able to track and measure it, people have got to step up to the plate and they've got to be able to accept where they failed. So is this part of the thing of the acceptance of failure that people have got to learn?
I think so, absolutely. Um, you know, in the industry, the chimney and fireplace industry, almost everybody pays either like hourly plus bonus or straight commission. And I always tell my people we win as a team and we lose as a team. So what I mean by that is if Joe Schmo goes out and measures the chase top wrong, and then Randy Road goes out to install it and it's measured wrong. Well, Joe Schmo's not getting the bonus on that. And neither is, and Randy Rod's not getting anything. We're losing as a team because there was an error there. So, and I can't pay money when the company didn't make money. And I really feel like today Cheryl's on fire and we should just let her talk because I love what she talked about expected because that's a huge pet peeve of mine, Cheryl's. I talk about entitled. So, for example, we have a snack box at work and I'm more than happy to provide snacks. But the day somebody complains because the snack box is out of this or they want to start making requests for certain snacks that are out of the budget or whatever, then it's become an entitlement and it's not going to happen.
I understand. So Cheryl, your thoughts. Brandon says you're on a roll today.
Well, another point I'd kind of like to make is and it actually came from I was watching a medical thing on TV a couple nights ago, and it's kind of like the steps. They did this and it didn't work, and they did this and it didn't work, and they kept doing it and moving on. And finally, one guy said, "What do I do?" And the guy said, "Go back to the beginning, pick it up there." Make that the accountability point is from the beginning and start over. They were doing tests. We need to do the post-mortem, as you say, to find out exactly where the ball was dropped. And the thing is, with the accountability or lack of, you're not going to catch it till you're way up to the point of going back. If you're, I mean, I have, as you know, a manufacturing business. We have steps between each sections, a lot of pictures taken, same as it is in the chimney service industry. But at that point, if I catch it in framing, I don't have to end up at the very end when it's going on the pallet and go back and tear everything off. It's the same way. And so I hold my people in framing accountable for their framing. And then I hold my sheeters accountable for themselves, but also for checking my framing. And we do back steps and I have a downslide of accountability. I'm at one end and then the guy that's actually cutting the metals at the beginning. So everybody looks back at everybody else to hold them accountable. And if it gets to the very end on the pallet and it's wrong, or to my customer and it's wrong, the accountability part is out of the window. And then there comes the pay. Do you pay for bad performance? when you had so many times to fix it.
Okay. And that brings the next one. And Cheryl, I'm going to start with you on this one. Do people have to have consequences if they fail to meet your objectives? If we have set a plan, we've set something and they've agreed to do it, do we have to put consequences on the end if they don't meet the objective?
Yes, there has to be some sort of a consequence that doesn't, in certain positions, it may not have to be monetary, consequences, but you have to have something, because if even yourself, us as leaders, if somebody does, if they're holding us accountable and we don't perform correctly, yes, we need something against us too. And it's just the way it is, because if you don't, it's like a child. If you keep letting them get by over and over with crying in a restaurant without stopping it, they're not going to quit. So eventually it becomes your problem and it's in your pocket. And if you didn't take it up with them in the very beginning, I say it comes out of your wallet because you didn't hold them accountable.
Okay. So, Brandi, what about you? Is there got to be consequences?
Absolutely. I just don't, and sometimes that consequence may be as simple as you disappointed me, and letting the person know that they failed and you're disappointed. And sometimes that's enough of a consequence. Sometimes it's got to be a couple days off without pay. I think the whole thing can be summed up in one sentence, which is don't accept the unacceptable.
Yeah. And as you're talking, and my thought process of what went through my head, knowing each of you as I know, and I know you both very well, and knowing myself as I do, one of the worst consequences I think that anybody would have to come in and sit down and explain to one of the three of us that they didn't get it done. To me, that would be such a sincere severe consequence. I would not want to undergo that. I mean, I can remember years ago and when I was running my business and I had an office that was on the second floor, and my guys would call it walking that mile. Okay. And what that meant was when they come in the evening, there was a note on their time card to see me before they left. And you would actually hear them coming up the stairs, and it was like a slow trudge. And that's what they called it. Hey, you got to walk that mile and see Doc, because they called me Doc. So to me, that is a consequence where people know, but you're putting it out and explaining to people what you're feeling. So, Cheryl, what other thoughts do you have on the matter of accountability? Because to be honest with you, it is a leadership issue. I want to make that real plain, real clear that when you have an accountability issue, I hate to tell you this, but it is a leadership issue that goes to your leadership style. So, Cheryl, you first.
It is very much a leadership start. You are, if you can't hold what you need to accountable, then it's out of your ballpark. The thing is, we talk our people into doing a lot of accountability charts. And so that's something they can look at. So who holds who accountable? And the charts start with you and then they branch out. But always it comes back to you if it's not done correctly.
Right. Brandi, what about you?
Yeah. I had a thought and I feel like I just lost it as Cheryl was talking about that. Although I did make a note to post it on the time card. I actually really like that idea. I'm normally sending them a private telegram, but I don't know. I think the post-it note might be a little more intimidating. Yeah. So I was having a conversation with an office manager earlier this week, and in this particular office, I have it set up where their CSRs use scorecards to score each other's calls, and then they turn them into the office manager. And I said to her, "How are the scorecards going?" And she said, "Well, they're not. They haven't done them in a little while." And I just looked at her and I said, "So whose fault is that?" And she whispered, "Mine." Going back to, yes, it's the leader's fault if she's not holding or he's not holding the team accountable.
Correct. And like you may have heard me say this before, but I firmly believe that leaders are readers. In other words, they read the wisdom. And I'm not talking about an audible book. I'm talking about actually reading. I know a lot of people love audible books, but really to absorb it, you about got to read it. So one of the books that I love to recommend, and it comes in right on the top, is John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And law number 2 is called the law of influence. The true measure of leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And in this particular chapter, he talks about Abraham Lincoln and when he went into the army. He went in as a captain, but when he came out, he was a private. So he was not, at that point, a tremendous leader. And see, that's the whole thing. None of us are born as tremendous leaders. This is not a skill that you come out of your diapers in and you know how to lead. This is a skill that is learned. You have to study to how to be a leader, and you have to realistically, many times you're going to have to change and change your process. And Cheryl, that's what you do whenever you're doing a disc debriefing. I know we did a group disc with a group yesterday, and you went through, and really we got to applaud the business owner because he allowed you to share his disc with his people so they could see basically how he functions. So, am I on track what I'm talking about here? Can anyone become this leader, even if their this does not say they can?
Yes. The thing about it is you've got to adjust, you have to adapt, you have to learn. The main thing is you don't have to be a high D, you don't have to be a high you don't have to be a high anything. You just have to have the willingness and the thoroughness to learn, like you said, to read, to work with self-help. This particular client last night was very open. He let me be very transparent with him, which a lot of leaders won't do. And I could watch his people look like they were buying into a new leader at that time instead of just their buddy. And so it was a good change to see happen. And you were talking earlier about a bad leader. I watched a documentary last night which really blew your mind that that's what I was doing, but it was on JF Kennedy. John Kennedy, after even becoming president, he was a brat. He, all the way through service, he didn't listen. He didn't do what he was supposed to. He had the leadership wasn't there. He was forced onto a U-boat one time to be the leader, and somebody ran into it and cracked the boat in two. But it was, the thing about it is a lot of the people that we consider major leaders, presidents, they didn't begin that way. They came from just snotty-nosed brats, for lack of a better word. But they made something of themselves. So anyone can make themselves a leader, but it takes a lot of work. I don't know if you could call anyone a natural born leader. You had something that helped get you from point A to point B. You did not and were not born a natural leader.
So what you're saying is they have studied leadership, they have changes, they have adapted, which I think all three of us have. It's like, one of the things that's tough for many of us to do is actually to just let go, assign someone a task and just get out of the way, just to get out of the way. That's a tough one. And when you look at it, I think all three of us fall into that category in earlier in life where we've had to learn to let people go and give them the reign to do those things. But again, we've got to hold that accountability. And to do that, if you don't have the processes to inspect for what you expect, you are going to be disappointed. You will be disappointed. You have to develop those processes. So Brandi, what's your closing thoughts on today?
Now you're
Your mic
speaking.
on. You forgot your mic.
I said, since you held up the laws of leadership, I'll hold up the laws of teamwork and read something out of it. So it says on chapter 17, when the team you have doesn't match up to the team of your dreams, then you only have two choices: give up on your dream or grow up your team. And part of growing up your team is holding them accountable. And this is often why clients hire us, because they know that they need somebody to hold them accountable. Just before this presentation, I was on the call with a client and gave him some tasks to do. And I said, okay, when are these going to be done by? And so we set a date that I'm going to check in with him and make sure that he has met those tasks. I have an app on my phone that I put my calories in. It holds me accountable. I have friends at the gym that make sure I'm there every morning. They hold me accountable. We can't just run rogue. That's my closing thought. Don't just run rogue. Don't be afraid to hold your people accountable, because if you don't, you're not going to have the culture and the employees that you want.
Gotcha. Cheryl, what's your closing thoughts on today's our episode today?
I'm going to take a little dip off here. Mine is back to my point of view. As a leader, be able to say, I'm glad I did, instead of I wish I had, when it comes to running your life and your company.
There you go. That's always a good one. And as before we close out today, like I said, it's all about learning. It's all about how to be a leader. But while I'm talking here today, before we end, I'd like to encourage you, if coaching is something that you think may be an interest to you, we are forming another group coaching. We're putting it together right now. And I'm actually putting a link up in the comments right now that you can go into, and you can hear a video on that page that's myself, Sheryl, and Brandi, tells you about what our group coaching program is all about. We're going to be starting a new group in May, and this is something, Brandi, tell them a little bit about what we do in a group coach setting. What is this like?
Well, instead of having one coach to hold you accountable, you have a whole lot of coaches to hold you accountable, because you've got all of your cohorts and your peers in there. But it's just a great time that we come together and we bring together our issues that we're having, or even our best practices. It's not always negative. And we share that with the group and get their insight. And a lot of times we learn so much from them and their insight. They may have a better widget. They may have some better way to do it than us. And we can take that away from the group coaching. And also we see people develop friendships in there. I guarantee there were some people at the convention that had never met each other before group coaching. And how nice was it to meet them in person and already have a sense of knowing them, because it is a very vulnerable, intimate space.
Yep. So, Sheryl, what about you? What do you see as the benefits for someone to be in a group coaching program? I think it's really important to also note that we have some of our one-on-one clients that are also in a coaching group also. It's kind of like a mixed group. It's a way to network with other people. So where do you see the benefits are, Sheryl?
One thing I like about it is these people become friends. They become not just another chimney service or another whatever service, but they learn to talk to each other, and they are very open there. The first couple times people are quieter because they're afraid. Excuse me. There's my accountability, but they're afraid to say something because they'll be afraid it's repeated, but it's not. It stops there. And it gives them someone that they can actually talk to. They have us there, and then they have sometimes up to 20 other coaches they can go to. And I think it's so cool to watch them say, I asked this. And I've seen when we've had it, when the three of us didn't get to say much, they were talking amongst each other, helping work out each other's problems, which to me is way far better than us just doing it all.
Yep. And also, in addition to that, I think you're getting many points of view that can come in, because if you've listened to our podcast, we may agree in principle, but at the same time, the three of us often have a different point of view. So a lot of times that brings forward that in a group call, you're going to get three distinct points of view. And another benefit is the monthly calls we do that I call a presentation call. And in the presentation call, that's where we bring in a subject matter expert that's going to answer all kinds of questions and do presentations fact, I just sent an invitation out for the next one, which will be it's an author that has recently published a book that I think would be a great benefit. We've interviewed him on here, and I'm hopefully he'll take that offer to actually come on and tell us about the challenges that his dad had building his empire. And I think that'll be a really interesting episode for everybody. So, anyway, appreciate you joining this week, as always, here on the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. We are the CVC Success Group. We have some additional people besides ourselves in the areas of CFO, training, other kind of things. So, hey, we're here. And if you want to get to a new level in this, feel free to contact us, reach out to us at the email address on the screen. Okay, so with that, we appreciate you joining us today, and we will see you next time on another episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network.